Welcome to another episode of Faith in Media, Christian in Media podcast, and I'm so blessed to have our guest today, Patrick Regan. Welcome to Faith in Media. How are you today?
Yeah, doing really well, thank you. Yeah, it's good to be here.
Good to have you. It's been a couple of weeks. We've had you at our recent conference, which was just incredible to hear some of your story and just some of the areas that you're really passionate about. So I thought it might be really great if you gave a mini introduction of yourself, just what you do, and the things that you really care about. That would be lovely. Thank you.
Yeah, it's always weird, isn't it, introducing yourself? So I guess I'm really passionate about social justice. I'm very passionate about well-being, mental health, seeing people, step out of shame and feel like they belong and have a role to play. So I've run various charities over the last 30 years or so, both of which I founded
Wow.
and grew to sort of large charities and been involved in working in the media and things like that in that process as well. So yeah, I've got involved in lots of different things. I do loads of speaking. I'm probably too much, and my wife,
It's
that's what my
never
wife
enough,
tells
never
me
enough
anyway.
speaking.
Oh my, I'm like, what am I speaking at next? And then really passionate about what I do, love what I do, and yeah, passionate about Christians being involved in the media massively. So it's a good place to be.
Amazing. I love what you said in terms of like, it sounds like your passions really lead kind of the life that you had. And I think that's such a privilege when we get to do that. I'd love to learn just a little bit more about how you started to work in the charity sector and how your journey in this field had begun.
Yeah, well, it started many, many years ago. I was a youth worker in a local church, and the school down the road had a stabbing in the school playground, and so they phoned the local church up to see if we can help. And I think the vicar was like, "That school's rough. Let me send the local youth worker to see what he can do." And so I got sent, and I was in a school very different to the culture I was brought up in. You know, this one school had 65 mother tongue languages, so it wasn't that the kids were stupid.
Wow.
Far from it, actually, far from it. They just didn't understand what was being taught. So we started helping with literacy and numeracy, and then I raised about seven. Well, I got 17 people to give me £25 a month, and I started a charity called XLP. XL stood for Wanting Young People to Excel in everything they did, and P stood for Project, and it just grew. It just grew, you know, and I guess as it grew, we started to understand more around some of the issues that young people are facing around poverty and educational failure and mental health, and then started delivering programs that sort of address some of those needs really, and that's how got me into this world that I've been living in over the last sort of 35 years or so.
Absolutely. And your work has been highly recognized over time. And like you said, 30 years is no small feat. I can't even imagine what that journey must be like. And I'm hoping we're going to dig into that a little bit more. But your work has been really recognized. Tell us how you felt about the moment when you learned that you were going to be awarded an OBE for your services to young people. And what did that recognition mean for you?
To be honest, it's a very strange experience because you get a letter through the post, and it comes through, you know, and it says on Her Majesty's service or something like that, you know, the official. And I thought, oh no, what have I done? And I thought, I haven't
Oh,
been caught
goodness.
yet, I think I was like, I'm in trouble, you know, and I sort of read it, and it was
Yeah.
like, and then real going, what does this mean? I don't really understand this. And I rang a friend up, and he goes, "You've got an OBE, you idiot!" And and I was, and to be honest, like I guess I'm not really wired, like, oh wow, it's an OBE, but it was a thing because I think I always struggled with being academic at school and achieving the same sort of things, and you know, degrees and in this and degrees in that, and like some of my peers and colleagues had. So to get an OBE from the Queen was lovely. I think it was lovely for my parents, particularly as well, and my nan was so happy, you know, because my nan is
Oh,
that generation who loves the Queen, and I mean the Queen's very popular, but I think with that wartime generation, so my biggest
yeah.
thrill was telling her, to be honest, because I think I knew she'd be totally made up. So
That is incredible. I love that you honoured your nan in doing that. That's something I would have 100% done myself. And also kind of, what did that, I love that you spoke about how, you'd had your own journey, and maybe it wasn't always, I think the kind of perspective that we think is going to be an obvious trajectory for what the world classes as success. So receiving that award and recognition must have been just such a wonderful experience. And I know that it was an award and it's meant quite a few things for you, but I imagine the journey along the way probably wasn't quite easy to get there. Did you ever envision when you started with your work in the charity space and with young people that it was going to progress to kind of what it's become now?
No, no, not at all. No, and I think it was. I always described it as a beautiful mess to people because people always see the show reel, and the success stories.
Exactly.
And I guess I think charities, maybe we're guilty a little bit of always putting those ones out, but anyone that's ever worked for a charity will know for every success story there's often like 20 heartbreaking ones. And so yeah, but I never grew. XLP grew to. I mean, it's still an amazing charity today, and I left there after 22 years, so it was a long time to
Wow.
start another charity called Kintsugi Hope, which has also grown to quite a considerable size across the UK. So yeah, no, it was never in my mind at all, and it was a big surprise, and all the other stuff that followed. I often say to people, we had visits in XLP for, I mean, like prime ministers galore, came down. We had Boris down, David Cameron down, Ed Miliband down, Nick Clegg down, and then Desmond Tutu came, Mary Robinson,
Wow.
former president of Ireland, and all these guys, and people were like, and then we had the royals twice in a year, and the Prince and Princess of Wales, and people always like, all the media guys were like, "How did you do it? What was the secret? And how big is your media department?" And I was like, "We don't really have a media department," and they were like, "What?" And I said, to be
Mm.
honest, like we are just getting on with what we feel like God's called us to do, and they've got every single situation they contacted us. We never wrote to them. We never asked them to come
Wow.
and then I felt we just built relationship, and you build relationship, you treat people well, and I always said to my team, you treat the PAs and the cleaners and everyone involved in this visit as well as you treat the PM, and you treat everyone with dignity, and you'll be surprised, you reap what you sow. It will come back to us, and I think that's partly, why we built so many great relationships and still have great relationships today, which is lovely.
I really love how you've shared that your toolbox for kind of the story of success is literally, firstly, you felt you were called to do it, which I really respect. And obviously, this is a Christians in Media podcast. So that really goes, and it's a huge part of determining people's why, as to why we're occupying these spaces, why are we doing the work that we're doing. But also, you shared really beautifully about, I think, just fostering relationship as the priority, not just the drive to have ticking boxes, who can we connect with for connection's sake. And like you said, the highlight reel isn't there just for the highlight reel's sake. Like there is clearly intentional relationship building and fostering as a big part of your culture. Would you say that's probably the magic key to the successes that you have seen with, you've not just got one charity, but multiple charities now that are really seeing the fruit of longevity, their time, the legacy they're leaving behind, and their impact? Would you say it's the relationships that kind of are the heartbeat, or is there some other magic tool that's going on as well?
No, I think it is relationship, and I think it's about values. I always say to people, if you could define your values, and because they're your priorities, they're the compass you make your decisions by. And my number one
Mm.
value in both XLP and Kintsugi was relationship, and relationship, generosity, authenticity, and honesty. And I had them written up on every wall in the office, and I always said, we make decisions based on these values. And I think particularly when it comes to working with people in the media, and I've got lots of friends now, both who have faith and people that have no faith, who work in TV, radio,
Mm.
and in all sorts of different spheres, actually, in Netflix and all sorts of things. And I was like, we're friends first, and then we might do something
Yeah.
together second. and you need to know that I'm not going to give away your contact details. I'm not, like, if you say no to me and I ask you to do something, that doesn't change anything. We will still hang out, and I'm still there. So, and I think that's really important. You know, I remember there's the stuff that you do that's unseen that's just as important as seen. You know, I remember politicians sometimes ringing me up before they go on question time and going, "Oh, what do I say about this?" Or there was one particular gentleman who, I won't mention his name, but he has blonde hair and he doesn't comb it very often. And he, he rang me up once, and I was in Sainsbury's with the kids, you know, and he's going, "Oh, I've got to do something for the
Oh
Telegraph,
goodness.
and I want to know about this," and you know, and for a lot of these people, I didn't always agree with their politics, quite far from it. But I think relationship doesn't mean you always have to agree with everything that someone stands for.
Yeah,
It means
that's
that
really
you
good.
find the common humanity, you find that everyone's made in God's image, and that, you know, and I always say to people, people are like, because I worked with all three parties, and people are like, you know, are you scared about being associated with one party or the other? I said, I would speak to anyone that wants to talk to me about well-being and social justice, and I don't care what party they're in. So I actually ended up speaking at all three party conferences one year, and I think that's the key, is relationship, relationship, relationship. It nurtures the belief change is possible, and that only comes through relationship.
I love what you said there, and I think, particularly as believers, that's such a crucial line. If God is going to entrust us with influential spaces like that, we need to be quite mindful about how, opinions, if we hold certain convictions and they are in either contravention or contrary to the people that we're working with, it's okay, but there is a line that we can walk that is still integrate, that is still loving, and like you said, fosters really healthy relationships. And that's
Yeah.
kind of our role. And I imagine we have a lot of young people on our mentorship program at Christians Arena. I'm sure you've heard of it before. And a lot of the questions are like, what do I do in my spaces because media is so influential? What does this say about me? Is there a conviction that I'm supposed to be kind of towing a line with? And it can be quite muddy and a bit of a grey area. And I think what you've said is so clear, just like, be a good person. And I love even how you spoke earlier about whether it's the cleaner, whether it's the PM that we have in kind of like having our vicinity at the time. You best be sure that we're reflecting what God has asked us to be like in terms
Yeah.
of our person and character, which I think is amazing. You mentioned as well a little bit about your work with the wellbeing space, and obviously Brighter Days Life is a place that you're really, really connected with now. Can you elaborate a little bit on the mission and the vision of that? That would be lovely to hear some more about how your programs of wellbeing kind of differ from other wellbeing programs.
Yeah, I think what happened was it was about 18 months ago now. I was on leadership team of a Christian festival, and just amazed at how many Christian speakers are in that circuit. Often, like, you know, if you do a seminar, you've got like 7 or 8 names you could put in there for that seminar, and I just felt really convicted. Like, what would it look like to go and speak at conferences that weren't a Christian festival, but be a Christian, if that makes sense? It was like,
Yeah.
like to go and speak at wellbeing festivals, book festivals, to speak in businesses, educational conferences, and so what I decided to do is we set up a company called Brighter Days, really inspired by the Chinese proverb that says it's better to light a candle than curse the darkness. And just so I started to write a book, and I wrote it for the sort of for everyone, you know. So like, it wasn't about
Mm.
this is for a Christian audience. This was like, you could literally give my best mate that, and I felt really challenged by that, because, you know, I'm sitting in my office and I'm looking at all my books, and I realized there wasn't one that I could give to a non-Christian that wasn't evangelistic, or
Mm.
you know, it was full of jargon, even though we say it's not full of jargon. And so I wanted to write something that was gentle, but still had an aspect of my faith and spirituality in there, but also talked about other aspects to do with mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual health. And I wrote it in short stories and poems and practical tools. And it was fascinating. School came up to me and said, I have 150 copies, please. And I was like, yes, you can.
Wow.
And they're like, we're going to give one to every year 11 kid because we've had 3 attempted overdoses in the school. And so what they did is they
Wow.
gave it to year 11 kids. They sent a note to parents saying, please discuss this book with your child, because they realized that some of the parents' mental health. I had another lady come up to me. I was speaking at a think tank in Westminster, and she said, I have 50 copies. And she said, my 15-year-old son has recently died by suicide, and I'm going to give them out at the funeral.
Wow.
And then other places, banks have gone, can you come and do some training for our staff, and we'll buy 200 books, because we just recognize that how desperate it is at the moment in the situation of well-being and mental health. And so Brighter Days was formed really off the back of the book. It's a company that gives away its profits to charity, and it trains businesses, education, local authorities, NHS, as well as charities, in tools for well-being, like practical tools, things that I can tangibly ingrain in my life, which are hopefully going to
Mm.
help me. So it's not like crisis management. It's not somewhere to go if you're, at the moment you're feeling suicidal or anything. But it is saying that all of us, a bit like we would go to the gym maybe to invest in our physical health or Slimming World or whatever, there are probably things that we can do to invest in our mental and emotional health as well, and our spiritual health as well. So yeah, so Brighter Days, and it's growing. I feel like, oh my goodness, this thing is growing so quick. So it's been fascinating. Places I've spoken in the last 6 months, absolutely crazy. So
Goodness.
yeah, I'm learning so much about communicating to different types of groups. Yeah.
That's so inspiring, and I love what you shared in terms of your target and kind of your motivation within this space is to really bridge that gap. And I think you're right. There's a lot of how do Christians occupy spaces without becoming, over Christianese focused or overly spiritual to an audience that are not quite there yet, but the need is still very real. And hearing just
Yeah.
the kind of way in which your work has been just accepted in all of these spaces that are not overtly Christian, but actually open to Christian principles through just your own story is such a wonderful and inspiring thing to hear. I've got to ask, when you see the impact of your work and you're in these spaces and you're talking to so many different people with different touching, moving stories, how has this kind of impacted or grown your faith over time?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I feel like it is. I never think about it unless I do an interview like this. Like it's almost like I think I'm probably in the moment, just getting on with it, And then people, when I come and do podcasts or radio stuff, they often ask me, and yeah, and sometimes it's nice. It's nice to stop and reflect back and see
Yeah.
what's happened. Um, I think in terms of faith, it's a weird one because it's like some people have had a really bad journey with faith. They've struggled. It's part of why they're struggling with their mental health, because often because they feel misunderstood by the church, or they've been given some
Mm.
really bad advice to, not take medication, or just to pray a bit harder, or to maybe think about something they've done wrong that's caused this mental health challenge. Other times, it's been really positive, and you see things that have
Mm.
opened up. So I feel like it's a bit like railway tracks. I always say to people, it's like there's some really amazing stuff goes alongside some really difficult stuff, and I think they go alongside each other. I think life is like that. Rarely is life always brilliant, and rarely is life always a disaster. It's the tension between the two, and I've
Mm.
definitely found, and faith for me has been as full as many questions as answers. And so I don't come to faith as like the expert. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm trying to work
Mm.
this out with everyone else. And so yeah, it's an interesting, and it's fascinating having the conversations. Most of the people I talk to would never go to church, and I think church works very well on the fringe, bringing people into something. But actually, I often think, oh, I'm in a coffee shop or in a pub. I'm looking around thinking, yeah, I want to do something here. I want to do something where people hang out and talk about what's really important to me.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's such an important balance for us all to recognize. It can be very easy when we're comfortable to, and we think we talk about this often now, but to associate or find ourselves in circles that make us feel comfortable and familiar, and particularly those who are of faith, like, oh, it's okay, I'm in a space where we're speaking the same language about spirituality, etc. But really, where is the need? And if God's going to call you there, like, he's going to provide also that sense of strength of what you need to be able to function in the ways that he's called you to be. And Jesus went to the people. He went to where they were. They weren't all coming to the synagogue, were they? So that is such an
Yeah,
important key factor to, I think, I
yeah,
love how you've described it. There is a tension space that I think we're all called to occupy, and it looks different for everybody. But it's the acknowledgement, like, yes, absolutely, find ways to feed and build your faith in the way that God calls us to gather together to build up one another's faith. But in the other breath, it's also, but I've also called you to the world, to go into the world, preach my good news, show my heart, show my compassion, be my hands and feet. And I think that tension, we don't always get it right, do we? And it's a bit of a challenge, particularly with our work and if we're operating in spaces like media as well. What would you say have been some of your biggest challenges with working in the areas of both well-being or just the charity sector, and just the things that you've seen through your experiences here?
yeah. It's an interesting question. I think whenever you lead anything, I think someone once said to me that vision and frustration are exactly the same thing. They're just spelt differently.
Oh, goodness.
I think that is true. It is true. Vision is the art of seeing the invisible that produces passion and energy in people you're trying to communicate with. It's been famously said, I think Jim Wallace said that Martin Luther King never said, I've got a complaint to make. He said, I've got a dream of justice and equality that
Yeah,
gathered and inspired people. And that made that speech in Washington such a key pivotal time in the civil rights movement. So I think knowing your vision, your dream, keeping the main thing. Like you said before, is always going back to the why. When I used to interview, I've interviewed hundreds of people over the years, and my first question is, what makes you get out of bed in the morning? And when they've done the alarm clock
absolutely.
and all that, it's about what you're passionate about, what makes you come alive. What can we help you flourish? So yeah, there's loads of things. There's been loads of challenges. I think with the mental health stuff, sometimes it can feel overwhelming. I was speaking in Estonia actually this weekend, and so many sad stories. And I was, oh my goodness, I felt, after one session, I just felt completely overwhelmed. I'm like, my goodness, what these people have lived through and been through, and sometimes the lack of understanding, as well. The debates that go on around medication and faith, and if you should take medication, and I'm not
Mm,
an advocate. Medication solves everything, but I certainly don't think you should feel ashamed if you feel like you should take it. And so yeah, so it's an interesting place to be sometimes.
yeah. And I think on the backside, I have to ask, what have been some of, if like, you could say, some of the highlights that you've really experienced there? The joy, the reason behind your whys that get really reiterated when you're kind of active in what you're doing. Would have been some of the really like positive or memorable moments that like really stick with you now.
Oh yeah, it's always people. It's always like individuals whose lives you've seen changed, and like I had a young kid who I mentored for years. He's now, who was you know, living in poverty, nicking stuff from shops,
Wow.
squatting in hotels, with his family, and he's my son's godfather now. He's married, he's got 3 kids, and I feel like he
Wow.
teaches more about life than I teach him now. Um, that's going way back. But then, like last week, just seeing people. I had this lady come up. We were doing a session for parents in a school, and often if you're a parent and you go to a session on well-being, you feel like I always used to feel I'm just going to get told off that we're not, kids on screens too much. This is happening, that's happening. Be aware of this. And it's just so uninspiring. People always feel guilty about that stuff anyway. They don't want to come to a training session and feel even more guilty. So I worked really hard at just trying to inspire people that life can be different if we, you know. And she was like, I just found hope tonight. I just found hope. She wasn't someone from a faith background, as far as I know, and had tears in her eyes, and yeah, and you just see like the conversations that happen. People start opening up to each other. It's interesting. Like we do evaluations for every talk that we do, and the two things that come
Mm.
back the most is I thought I was the only one that was struggling with this, and now I realise everyone around me is struggling. And we've never had that conversation in work before. We've never found out that type of stuff. We've been so task motivated. And of course, all the research says the more you invest in people's mental and emotional health, the better their work performance will be anyway. You know, makes sense. You know, if you're
Yeah.
completely frazzled and exhausted and you're giving out of nothing all the time, then it's really hard to be
Mm.
creative. It's really hard to innovate. It's really
Yeah.
hard to do that. So if you can invest in that side of yourself, then actually the results for businesses and for workplaces can be huge. And so it
Yeah.
makes complete sense, you know, when the Bible says live life to the full and talks about shalom, which is all about well-being, you know, and people are like, well, mental health's never
Yeah.
mentioned in the Bible. The whole Bible is about shalom. The whole Bible is
Oh,
about,
absolutely.
you know, it's the
Yeah.
best that we can do, you know, and it's not all about hanging on until we die just so we can get to heaven.
Mm.
It's about here and now. So yeah, lots of highlights, lots of lowlights. But yeah,
I love what you said there. I think that's really, really important to recognize. And I think the topic of mental health, the topic of well-being, is still kind of like a fairly new conversation that churches or Christian communities are actually willing to engage with in the gritty detail. I think, like you've mentioned before, the almost brush over, like maybe just have more faith, or that tension about should it be okay that I need to take medication, and all of this type of shame association with it sometimes. But actually, mental health is not something that's alien to God. We only need to look, and I think you mentioned this already in the scripture, does not David within the Psalms wrestle with his mental health and his faith so much? And Jeremiah, the weeping prophet, always, like there is so much emotion, the deep darkness of what it's like navigating this very real world is not something that God is unfamiliar with. And it's so incredible to hear people like yourself really pioneering, like, no, there is space to talk about this. There's space to engage with it. It doesn't mean that we are falling short of finding our way again in our faith as well. I would love to know your thoughts in terms of what would you see, what would be the dream to see what the impact of what Brighter Days is going to achieve in 5 years and 10 years? What is the dream for you about the work that you've been doing with wellbeing?
yeah, I think you know it's about seeing people and organisations really flourish. It's around seeing a world where mental and emotional health is understood and accepted, and where people feel safe and
Mm.
supported and can talk and we can have these conversations and like in some ways that mental and emotional health is treated very similar to physical health. That there's you know you mentioned there in your little what you were saying around the word shame, and I think that's huge, you know. And I think Brené Brown's
Mm.
often done a lot of research on this, saying that you know shame is the difference. You know, guilt is I've done something wrong. Shame is I believe I am wrong, and to step out of shame,
Yeah.
you know, you need to step out of feeling hidden, feeling that you have to hide because you're so down on
Yeah.
yourself. And you know, it has like I think she says it has two gremlins. Who do you think it are? And you're not enough. And it loves silence, secrecy, and judgment, but it can't stand compassion and empathy.
Mm.
And so to have a culture where compassion and empathy and kindness is forefront of organizations and people's lives would be incredible. And that comes from internal transformation as well as external things. And I often say to companies, you know, it's sometimes about our culture. I feel like every organisation I've ever worked in, every church I've ever worked in has a culture, and we define culture
Yes.
as the way we do things around here. And so, if your culture's
Mm.
toxic, it's gone wrong, then then we can give all the mentoring tools you know you like, and they will help. But actually, the culture needs to change, and I sort of feel like there needs to be
Mm.
a culture shift as well as people feeling empowered to be able to make big decisions and. Yeah, so it's a hugely challenging area, but it would be an amazing shift for people to feel safe and supported.
I love that aspiration, and I think you'll find many who come across this conversation will feel like, I want to align with that. I certainly do. And just listening to you has been really inspiring to see what's possible. You've done it. You have found a way to balance that bridge of bringing people together, and you're utilizing your faith experiences, you're utilizing your faith tools, but also it's such an inclusive space. And that's what I think we really, really need more of as the church, operating outside of the walls of a building. Absolutely. This has been an incredible conversation, Patrick. Thank you so much for being with us today. But I just wanted to get you to answer one last question for me, if that's okay. You've mentioned before, we've got quite a lot of young people that are coming across our podcast that are navigating kind of their next steps with either occupying space in media or in the charity space. Now, given your extensive background, what advice would you be able to offer young professionals looking to make the kind of meaningful impact that you have been able to achieve so far, and how can they get into that themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I think number one, like we've said, try and build relationship, and I think that goes,
Yeah.
to everything, and maintain relationships. So, we've got an event coming up on men's mental health, because obviously men, I think it's 84 men take their own lives every single week.
Yeah.
And I know now that I can sit here and I can email a whole load of people across the BBC and across different, and because I've invested in those relationships over the years, the email's more likely to be seen than not, which is part of the challenge in that type of thing. So I think definitely investing in relationship. I think the other thing is around just answering the question that you're asked. I've seen a lot of Christians work in the media who are paranoid about getting God into every single answer. And probably actually
Yeah.
one of my biggest challenges are Christians who want me to preach more in the media or be more overtly Christian. And I remember there's one guy, I was doing this tour around, and he was very upset with me, and he was telling me, you need to just mention Jesus a lot more than you do. And I remember saying to him, how did Jesus communicate? And he was like, oh, I'm not sure. And I went, well, it was mainly parables. That's the way he communicated. He communicated story. And then I was like, what were those stories about? And again, I'm not sure. I was like, well, if you think about it, a lot of them were about fishing and farming, and partly because that's what
Yeah.
I understood at the time. Everyone understood that they were the two most common things of the day, and he chose stories about that. And I was like, not every story finished with a nice, neat conclusion like a Disney film. It was like, the story of the
Yeah.
prodigal son. Does the older son go into the party? We don't know. We're left hanging there. We don't know if he went to
Yes.
the party or not. He may have done, he may not have done. Jesus never tells us. We're just left hanging. And I said, I've worked out that if you work with the media particularly, that if you tell a story that's really real to you and honest, then most people can't argue with a story. We can debate stats and speeches and all that all the time, and people do. And I'm like, be educated, get your stats, do your research. I used to teach my team stats and stories. That's every interview I ever went into, stats and stories. And then that when you start the conversation, try and go to what you think is the critical issues. I remember I was on
Yeah.
Radio 2 or something. I think it's Vanessa Feltz, and we were talking about some of the issues around gang culture and this and that, and then I just made this comment, around, I still think there's hope, and I still think that, I remember when Desmond Tutu came to XLP, he had this line, your past doesn't have to define your future. And then she went
Yeah.
silent, and I was like, oh no, have we been cut off? Did she not like my answer? And she was like,
Wow.
yeah, it's fascinating. Your past doesn't have to define your future. She goes, do I agree with that? I'm not sure. I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. And then she went, I'll tell you what we're going to do. Tomorrow we're going to make the whole program about that comment. Your past doesn't have to define your future. I want you to ring in from all across the country, and we're going to discuss, does your past have to define your future? And I thought this was like such a fascinating thing. We'd gone from talking about gangs, which is important. I'd answered the questions, but I try to get it onto what the key root issue is, and around hope and redemption and reconciliation, and I think that's the key, isn't it? And that's the story that we can tell. and that we have something to say. And so, yeah, my advice: relationship, answer the question you asked, and tell stories, and tell lots of stories, because no one can argue with your story.
I love that. That is a beautiful summation of, I think, any of us that are in the storytelling business, and particularly if God has asked you to occupy spaces in the media, is a huge amplifier for stories, whatever that looks like. A huge thank you to you, Patrick, for sharing your wisdom, your story, and sharing just so many huge, like, useful nuggets as to how we can kind of move forward with holding on to some really important things that we should value above just drive or just career focus or just goals. That there's some really important things if we're willing to submit to that. Patrick, it's been such a blessing to talk to you. Thank you so much for being with us at Faith in Media today, and we look forward to watching you just increase with all that you're doing with your work, and we wish you every blessing for your endeavors. Thanks for being with us today.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
You've been listening to Faith in Media with Carla Adebekun. Make sure you catch our episodes and hit subscribe. Please share and leave us a comment. Christians in Media is a UK charity that supports, encourages, and inspires Christians from across the ever-changing media landscape. Find out more at www.christiansinmedia.co.uk and connect with us via our socials.